People who have stories they want to share, but have not found a question relevant to them. What are your stories? One late night coming home from an evening out, my husband, a friend of ours, and myself rounded the corner to the stairs that lead to our apartment when we saw it. Sitting about halfway up on the stairs was an opossum, eating a sandwich. He was sitting on the stairs just like people do, on his butt, with his little feet sticking out, and in his hands was an honest to god Subway 6-inch, still in the paper but slightly unwrapped, just like people eat it. It was like he was a tiny person in an opossum suit. There was just something so human-like about everything he was doing. We stood there for what felt like ages watching this opossum eating, and trying to figure out what to do. No way were we going to risk walking past him. We finally decided to take the long way around back to the second set of stairs, but as long as I live I'll never forget that opossum. It was such a truly surreal moment. Era. Oh my goodness, thank you for the rewards you guys. Also for everyone asking about photos, this was around 2003, so cameras weren't in everyone's pocket at that time. Trust me, if that happened today I'd be sharing video of the funky little man and his sandwich. I probably would have stayed there to stare at him simply because I'd wanna see an opossum eat a whole sub. I love my backpack. It's nothing fancy, just a bog standard Element rucksack, but I picked it out, and it's like the only fashion brand article I own. I remember the kids in my middle school flipping out over Element gear back in the day, so it brings back fond memories. Anyway, a couple of years ago I was backpacking/road tripping across Canada. We stopped at Hope, BC for a bite to eat before continuing on to Kelowna, where we had booked accommodation for a couple of nights. I don't quite remember how, but when we arrived around 9 PM and unpacked the car, I couldn't find my backpack, bearing in mind this had everything in it: passport, house keys, iPad, Canadian currency, my favorite sweatshirt, phone charger. I figured the worst, that we had forgotten to lock the car while in the cafe/diner and someone had yoinked it, because I couldn't remember bringing it with me into the shop. I did not get a lot of sleep that night. The next day I called the diner, just in case I had forgotten it inside. The nicest girl answered the phone and said that yes, there was a backpack there. I asked could she send it out to Kelowna and just take whatever it cost out of the cash envelope in the bag. She agreed immediately to send it out that evening, and I hung up, relieved. Unfortunately, being a weekend, it didn't arrive before we were due to leave the area on a 7-day camping trip through Alberta down the Icefields Parkway. So I asked the Airbnb owner if they could send my backpack onto our next stop in Calgary to a RAPS drop-off point or whatever, and again just help themselves to some cash. She agreed, and I left on a week-long trip with no signal, camping in the Rockies. It was a great week. I almost forgot that I was missing just about everything I would have needed to get home to Europe. I remember finally understanding what Bilbo says in The Lord of the Rings: I want to see mountains again, Gandalf, mountains, and then find somewhere where I can rest. I still wish I could go back there and do it all over. Leaving Banff though, I came back down to earth with a bump. We got to Calgary for on Canada Day, so everything was closed, which meant another night of worrying, but the next day I was first in line at the UPS store to pick up my parcel. It was such a relief seeing the familiar shade of burgundy when I opened it up, and everything was there, minus about $40 in shipping costs. Whenever I look at my bag I remember how nice people can be when you just ask for help. They went out of their way to help an idiot stranger get his bag back, and I remember all the more vividly that wonderful trip through an amazing country. Back in high school I worked as kennel helper at a veterinarian office. One day we ran out of sink cleaner and some various products necessary for work. He sent me to Walmart to stock us up. I loaded about 10 or 15 cans of Comet and a few jugs of Clorox in the buggy and was headed over to get something on the other side of the store. As I rounded a corner I almost collided with another lady's buggy. She looked down and all but screamed, "Is there a sale on Comet? Oh my god," and took off running with her buggy towards the cleaning aisle. I tried very hard to catch her and tell her it was for work. But she was absolutely determined to grab the rest of the comet. If you were accidentally scammed by a teenager into buying a Duckton of Comet in 1984 or so, please know I tried to stop you. I hope someday I see the post about how I was scammed into buying a Duckton of Comet in 1984 by a teenager in Walmart. I was at the zoo one time when I was younger, camp trip, and I stopped by the gorilla enclosure. The gorillas, being gorillas, were ambling all over the place and hooting like crazy. But for some odd reason, when they saw my face, they were enchanted. I had 4 to 5 gorillas just staring at me and lounging around. They didn't seem territorial or anything. I ended up playing a game of peekaboo with one of them and unfortunately never got to see any of the other enclosures. It's a fond memory, that's for sure. Apparently some primates like certain people because they have a similar hair color to their species and see them as similar to themselves. The story of how my mother reunited with her sister. My mother was born in the very far east of Russia. Her father was a survivor of the gulags, and she was raised in a small settlement that was mainly populated by ex-prisoners and their families. Before my grandfather married, he had survived a mine collapse and while in recovery had an affair with a nurse that produced a child. After being released and settling down with my grandmother, he had reached out and established contact with his daughter. They met a few times and he even took my mother on a few occasions to meet her. She lived in a city 5,000 kilometers to the south. But eventually, once the government let them move, my mother's family moved across the country, and this being the times before cell phones and social media, they lost touch with my aunt. The last time my mother saw her, she was about 12 and my aunt was about 20. Fast forward about 17 years later, my mother is on the Moscow metro, taking my sister to music school. She sees a woman sitting across from her, and as she describes it, just felt a gravitational pull towards her. She begins staring at her, trying to figure out why it feels like she knows this person. Suddenly, it clicks, and as the train pulls into my mother's stop, she gets up and grabs this woman and says, "Are you another Rusky pianist's aunt, daughter of his grandfather? Get off the train with me now." And lo and behold, her intuition was right. And that's how, after about 17 years of no contact, my mother just happened to reunite with her long-lost sister on a crowded Moscow metro train. My stepsister has a lot of mental and health issues. Severely autistic, and a lot of people assume she just can't function. My stepmother, neither of our mothers, another wife, was horribly abusive when we were kids, and much more so to my sister because she couldn't vocalize it. There was a point right after my grandparents got custody that my sister enough and just walked downstairs, stared our stepmother in the eye, and pissed everywhere before walking back upstairs. She knows exactly what she did, and it was the funniest shit because the stepmother had to clean it. To this day she acts like my sister was a horrible person who just didn't like her, and every time she tells the story I laugh my ass off because my sister dealt with so much shit and that was her best docu. What beautiful revenge. My great grandmother lived in a nursing home for the last years of her life. She was about 95, with minimal eyesight and hearing when this happened. My great grandmother told my mother she was afraid of that lady in black. "What woman in black?" my mother would ask. "The one that is standing at my bed every night. I think she is finally coming to get me." Naturally, my mother dismissed this as a figment of her grown-ass imagination. One evening, when my mother was visiting, GGM told her, "I think I'm going to die tonight. Can you stay? I don't want to be alone when the lady in black comes for me." So my mother stayed at her bed, sleeping and comfortably in an old armchair. Suddenly, she awoke to some noise she could not immediately pinpoint, but she saw a figure in a long, black gown, standing at the far end of the bed. My mother's scream must have woken the whole nursing home, but it especially scared the lady in black. She turned tail, left the room, and ran into one of the nurses, who came running to investigate my mother's scream. It turned out The lady in black was my GGM's bedridden and demented neighbor. Nobody knew she could actually walk, let alone dress up in her favorite black dress and wander the nursing home at night. Apparently, she was seen by some of the other inhabitants, who, fearing they would thought to be crazy, simply never talked about the ghost that would enter their rooms at night to stand at their beds and water their plants. I was in the middle of a contract once with a guy when blood started pouring out of his ear. He ran straight out the door without a word, and I was all kinds of worried for him. I'm so glad he turned back up later that week and explained he'd just had surgery on that ear. I sometimes wonder how I would have felt if he never came back. I kept fearing what sort of condition could cause that sort of thing to happen out of the blue. I had tubes put in my ears when I was very little, once when I was 4 and once when I was 7. A couple years after the first set, maybe I was 6, I was playing with my neighbors and all of a sudden my left ear started gushing blood. It was a lot of blood. But it didn't hurt. Just ducking terrifying for a 6-year-old to see that much blood coming out of their ear. Wife was on her first Zoom meeting last March in the kitchen. I asked if I could be off-screen cooking breakfast quietly, and she said yes, as long as I'm quiet and not distracting. I wound up burning what I was cooking, causing lots of smoke. Then when I was trying my best to get the situation under control, my robe that I was wearing laid on the burner, electric stove, and started smoking. So basically my wife told me to not be distracting, and I wound up lighting myself on fire. To her credit, she maintained poise and completely ignored my situation. We still laugh about it a year later. I can just see your wife on the Zoom call and you flailing around in the background trying to put the fire out. Haha, I kept looking over at her and could tell that she was thinking, yup, this is my husband. My family pet growing up was named Darwin, and she was a massive Airedale Terrier. She was the light of our lives, truly the world's best dog. She would herd the chickens and let the baby chicks nestle into her fur and nap on her as she sat quietly in the sunshine, not moving lest the peeps be disturbed. But her most heroic act came when my brother Liam, about 10 at the time, was trying to move our basketball hoop and base out into the yard for the summer. He didn't notice the 2 rattlesnakes coiled up under the base. But Arwen did. She leapt in front of Liam, between him and the snakes, and both Liam and my dad, who was nearby, saw both snakes strike. Dad ran and grabbed Liam, pulled him away, pulled Arwen aside with the other hand, then sent Liam running to grab the hatchet to dispatch the snakes. We took Arwen inside and put her on her bed, and we called the vet. The vet said he would come out to put the dog down, but if she was bitten by 2 snakes, there was basically no chance she'd live. But my mom said no way in hell was she putting her baby down without a fight. So she did some googling and found out that just loading the poor dog with Benadryl can counteract snake venom. And that's just what she did. Arwen lay still, swollen and bleeding, for 3 days. But then she got up. And she walked around. And she lived 5 more years, dying at 17. She was the best dog. So there is now Antivenom for dogs/pets. Also, there is an awesome group on FB National Snakebite Support that will put you in touch with experts, doctors, veterinarians, depending on who was bitten, to help you get the best treatment. Just in case anyone reading this ever needs it. I have never seen a question that would let me tell this story. I was a production assistant on a stop-motion kids show. A big part of my job was going out to purchase supplies the workshop needed to build the sets and puppets, etc. Now the thing about these kind of workshops is they will use whatever works, and they often come up with unorthodox solutions as shortcuts, like the time they sent me to a sex shop at 9:30 AM to buy thumb cuffs. Our cop puppet needed handcuffs, and they were the perfect size. But that didn't even compare to my most amusing/embarrassing supply run ever. The animation director came up to me one afternoon saying that he needed me to go to the drugstore to buy, and I quote, the largest tube of kite jelly you can find. In stop motion, Kaya's used to simulate water, especially when it has to interact with the puppets. It stays put between frames and doesn't damage the paint. Anyway, our seamstress overheard our discussion and asked me, while I was at the drugstore, to get every tube of wet wipes they had, safe way to clean the puppets and wardrobe, and we went through a lot of them. Next, the woman in charge of making all the limbs pipes up and asks me to get 6 pairs of white nylons. While I'm at it, they hold the magnets in the feet. So this was my shopping list: 1 extra large tube of Kai jelly, 6 pairs of white nylons, and every tube of wet wipes in the store. The look on the cashier's face when I dumped my basket out on the counter was priceless. And for me, fairly embarrassing. When I was a child, I thought the term bust a nut was the same as break a sweat or to heavily exert yourself. I remember one day telling my older sister I had busted a nut after cleaning the house, and the look of pure confusion and concern on her face. I didn't find out until years later what that actually meant. I'm a female BTW. Edit. Thanks for the awards, y'all. I'm glad I could make you all laugh. I mentioned this story years later to my older sister, and she has no recollection of it, but the memory has always stayed with me. When I was maybe 12 or 13 years old, I was out camping in my backyard and was watching the stars, hoping to see a meteor or two. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a satellite moving across the sky, traveling right to left. Out of the corner of my other eye, I see another satellite appear, moving from the horizon up. I see the speed they are both traveling and realize that if they keep moving at their current speed and trajectory, at least to my eye, they are going to hit each other. I keep watching them get closer and closer together until finally they are about to cross paths. They intersect each other, and suddenly there's a quick bright flash, and then neither of them are there anymore. I've often thought about what I saw. I know the odds that I watched 2 satellites collide and obliterate each other are basically 0, but I can't think of any other explanation for what I saw that night. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Thanks to you /Cirque says I may be getting closer to an answer. The timelines work out for it to have potentially been the August 1996 collision between the French Ceres military reconnaissance satellite and debris from an Ariane rocket. But I would need to know where the collision happened in relation to the ground. If it was over the northeastern US, we may have a winner. I'm having a hard time believing that a piece of space junk would be reflective enough to appear in the night sky as a satellite, but this is closer than I've ever gotten to having an answer, so I'm running with it until someone finds me a better answer. Edit. You /Cirque says took a deeper dive, and it looks like the geolocation doesn't match up. Crash happened over the Indian Ocean, and I was in New England at the time. Oh well, the search continues. Waiting for my takeout at a Chinese restaurant when this middle-aged man stormed in complaining that he'd been waiting 30 minutes outside for them to bring him his spaghetti. The bar staff tried to explain that he might have been looking for the Italian restaurant next door, but he wasn't having any at that. Screaming commences for 5 minutes, climaxing with this brilliant line, "What the hell do you know? I have a master's degree." Shortly after that, his wife calls asking where the hell he is, and he starts blaming the staff. She starts yelling at him, and he gets all sheepish, then slinks out the door to the Italian restaurant next door. Hilarious to witness, but I felt sorry for the wait staff, so I left a 40% tip. Inside joke in the family now, to say I have a master's degree when things start getting heated normally calms things down pretty quickly. I adore stories like this for the sake of quotable phrases. I'm the same way when it comes to loudmouths at places. Irregular though. Big tips. Pulled a stranger's dildo out of my pocket at the pub. Went to buy a new jacket at Target. Tried on the one on the rack, but it was one size too small. Went back to the rack, grabbed the next size up, and went straight to the counter and paid for it. Cashier throws it in the bag. I head home and throw the bag on the table. Next night my mates turn up at my house, unannounced, to grab me to go to the pub. I get dressed real quick, grab the bag with the jacket, and jump in the car and head off to knock the top off a couple of frothers. A few shandies later, and we decide to head home, get outside, and it's definitely jacket weather. I throw the jacket on. The boys give me a hard time about how fancy it is. I put my hands in the pocket and find an object in there. No idea what it is, or how it got in there. I pull it out in front of everybody. I'm left standing there, in my fancy new jacket, out the front of the pub with the lads, with a stranger's dildo in my hand, and no idea how it got there. Of course nobody believed that I had no idea how that thing came to be in my possession. Almost 20 years later, and I'm still curious about the series of events that lead up to somebody needing to hide their dildo in a jacket on the rack at Target, why they didn't return to get it, and if they did return, what their reaction was when they couldn't find the jacket. I once gave the singer Meatloaf 2 very awkward handshakes. This was obviously a few years back, when both conventions and handshakes were a thing. Meatloaf arrived at his booth, and the first thing he did was go down his line to personally shake hands with everyone there. Unexpectedly, Meatloaf was offering handshakes with his left hand, and me being a righty, when it came time for me to shake his hand, my brain had a meltdown of what to do, so instead of also using my left hand to shake his hand, I extended both hands and awkwardly cupped his. I knew I messed up, so I didn't commit to the awkward hand cupping, so on top of it being awkward, it was also loose, and if there's one thing that makes handshakes worse, it's when they are weirdly limp. He then went to his booth, began signing autographs, and eventually I made my way to the front. I got my autograph, and once again he offered his left hand to shake. This second handshake was slightly better than my first, in that this time I only extended one hand, my right, which I then noticed and went to, and then finally successfully offered my left hand. He shook it, and I went on my merry way with my autograph and a new story to tell. Very nice man, was very friendly to his fans, and never once brought up my inability to give a proper handshake to a left hand. One time I had a substitute teacher who fell and hurt herself while walking me somewhere. She went to the nurse, didn't tell any of the other teachers, they asked me during lunch where she was, and disappeared forever. I'm assuming she may have been let go for not telling anyone that she couldn't teach for the remainder of the day. It's basically a fever dream memory at this point, cause it happened when I was 7. I hope she's okay now. Reminds me of a substitute I had who was like 90. The fire alarm went off, and we all got up to leave. He asked where we were going as he didn't hear the fire alarm. In a busy revolving door downtown, a guy stopped mid-cycle to pick up something on the floor. As he bent over, the glass partition in the revolving door immediately behind him whacked him hard in the butt. The guy made a big scene, yelling at the person behind him that he did it on purpose, and that he was going to call his lawyer. I've shared this before, but my friend from grad school had previously been a skydiving instructor in Colorado, and had jumped more than 600 times. One of these times, he, for some reason, had his wallet in his suit, and it fell out. Fell to earth somewhere. He figured this sucks, but oh well. Absolutely no chance of finding it. Separately, a man in rural Colorado was found murdered. Turns out in their remote cabin where he lived with his daughter, he had been sexually abusing her, and she finally had enough and killed him. The police searched the house and all of his property, and found my friend's wallet in the trunk of his car. Police thought to themselves, fucking idiot murderer left his wallet in this dude's trunk, damn easiest arrest ever. Friend had the super believable alibi of couldn't have been me, officer, actually that wallet fell out of my pants while I was skydiving. Edit to add, my friend was never arrested, but he was questioned and had to have his story corroborated. From what I remember of him telling me the aftermath, the cops knew early on that it was the daughter, so she might have confessed. That's pure speculation though. The sexual abuse / self-defense detail didn't come out until later though. When the cops cleared my friend, they told him the father had taken all of his cash. They have no idea why he kept the wallet. One of my favorite stories to tell. Pure shenanigans. So when I was a teenager I was in an iconic trio of friendship with Patrick and Pinky. Once we got older though we all moved around and we would hang out in pairs, but it was hard to coordinate us all hanging out at the same time. About 5 years ago we were all finally free just after Christmas and decided to meet up at our favorite spot, Denny's. Patrick had been dating this girl who is awful and I did not like her. She was mean, they fought a lot, it was a very toxic relationship. However, Pinky had made a painting of Patrick and her as a Christmas present and brought it with her to the restaurant. We also had a video camera going so this is all on tape. We were just filming us being silly and stuff. Patrick ended up dropping the news that their girlfriend was trying to get pregnant. My reaction, on tape, is why? Lol. We then proceeded to have a deep friend talk with them about how that's a terrible idea and they opened up about how they were really feeling about it and how things were in the relationship and we were basically trying to convince them to break up with her. But then we had this ducking painting so what are we gonna do with it? Awkward. Lol. So me and Pinky went into the women's restroom and on the wall there was nothing but a nail. We hung the painting up and it fit perfectly. Even the colors coordinated with the style of the bathroom. It was perfect and the funniest thing ever. We left it there for years and would each go back and visit it whenever one of us was in town. Apparently a while back though, that Denny's closed down but luckily the painting was saved and it now lives at Patrick's brother's house. Back in early 2018, when I first moved to Utah to start school, I was at a 7-Eleven when there was this girl, and she was asking for directions to the train station. I pointed her in the right direction, but she was walking. I figured duck it, I have an hour until class, so I'll give her a ride. She tells me about studying/volunteering, can't remember which, in Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, or some other Spanish country for months. She says she came out here to explore the area and that she moved in with an old high school friend, but he ended up being crazy and flipped out on her. She had to pretty much jump out of his truck because he wouldn't pull over. She was planning on just taking a bus out, but she left her wallet in his place. I tell let's go grab it real quick, but he ended up following us there and I flipped a quick U-turn out of there. Ended up completely just leaving everything there because I figured this dude might shoot us. I'll let her use my charger so she can get in contact with her parents to give her enough money to buy a ticket home and send her on her way. I had to get to class, so I kinda left in a hurry once I dropped her off at the station and didn't get her info so she could let me know she made it home safe. I never got her name, but I know she was going somewhere in the Midwest. So if this story sounds familiar, and you remember a buff-bearded Mexican dude in a white Volkswagen hatchback helping you out, let me know that you're okay. It's been on my mind forever, because I never knew what happened after I left. Okay, I get it. Puerto Rico is a part of the US. One time I was walking across campus stoned. I'm walking by two kids, aged maybe 10 and 5, like 20 meters away. Not sure why they were there without an adult, but they were. The younger one looks at me and yells, "Hey, I like your shirt." So I yell, "Oh, thanks." He responds, "And your backpack is okay." I don't respond. The older one yells, "He's working on his compliments." We both continue on our ways. A few hundred meters away, a dude about my age walks up with a tray of cookies, says, "Hey, you want a cookie?" I'm like, "Yay, I'd love a cookie." "What's the cookie for?" He says, "No reason, just handing out cookies." "You want two?" I say, "Yay, I'd love two cookies." "Thanks a lot, bud." So I take 2 cookies and they were awesome. It was a pretty good walk.